Welcome back then folks to of course day 3 of Projects Pack number 15, and this time we've got of course another favourite of mine, Tommy Kaira, the Tommy Kaira M30, which I must admit, despite being a huge GT2 fan, I don't think I ever used in that game, because of course the M30 based on the R31 Skyline was in Gran Turismo 2. In that form it seems it was using a 3-litre engine though, rather than the, well, as you can see, bored out, etc., 2.2 in the case of this one. So unfortunately, there's not too much you can do about that here. And as far as the spec, again, we are unsurprisingly using GT2 as the reference, so doubtless it's a bit different to real life, but you can see the numbers aren't that crazy. In fact, this is more reminiscent of like the Tommy Kaira Sylvia, for example, which I did, so more of a useful lower-end kind of car. It's 488 points or whatever it is there, so that's pretty low as well. You could use it quite feasibly in career mode if you wanted to. Of course, quite a few people have done versions of this livery. The one that I'm using is a fairly popular one, but it's also one of the best, if not the best, I could see in terms of getting all the details right. In terms of the parts, it's also a pretty simple one to do. You've got the sports air filter. You actually don't need the sports silencer because the real thing has a single exhaust pipe, and even though the one here in the game has a pipe which is technically far too big, it's the closest you could get. So if you want to go for like the standard pipe or the sport pipe, which is still a twin, like shotgun style, you could go for that. Personally, I really wanted that single pipe, so I've gone for the semi-racing one, which we'll get to in a second. We've got the sports brake pads, of course. For the tyres, I've upgraded it just a little bit from comforts to sports hards. For the club sports section, we've got the bored out engine, of course, like I said, to get it at least a little bit closer to that 3-litre. I'll just check in the ultimate section because, yeah, we've got the stroked out engine, so you don't need to worry about the bored section. For the club sports, to go back to it, the sports clutch and flywheel, the discs as well, the power restrictor and the ballast. You don't always need those fitted on a build, but it can come in handy if you have to restrict the car, you know, on the fly in an online lobby, for example, and then you don't have to come all the way back out to buy it. As far as the semi-racing, we've got fully customised computer. Of course, that's overkill in the grand scheme of things, but you've got to get it to the right amount of power one way or another. We've got the semi-racing silencer, like I said. As far as the rest here, the fully customised diff, the height adjustable sports suspension. For the racing parts, we've got the stroked out engine as well, which, again, if I recall correctly, we've gone for the stroked up S in the extreme section, which of course cancels out that anyway, so you don't need to worry too much about doing that. As far as everything else down here, unsurprisingly, nothing is fitted. And for the extreme stuff, I've actually not bothered doing the steering angle adapter. I wanted to see what it was like without it, and honestly, it doesn't really feel like the car needs it anyway. It's not like it's got a huge amount of power to deal with to begin with, and for the ultimate stuff, like I said, you've got the stroked out engine. So, quite simple. The car itself is a classic, so it's a bit more expensive, I guess, than some, but it's not that expensive of a build to do. Now, as far as the actual tuning side of things goes, we'll jump into the garage. Now, sports hards are fitted, of course, for the suspension, 125mm, which sounds pretty high, but as you can see, it certainly isn't. We've got 1 on anti-roll, 25 and 45 for the dampers, 1.85 for the springs, 1 degree of camber, front and back. Of course, the toe is not adjustable with this suspension anyway, but it's got a little bit on the back. For the diff, I've gone for 10, 30 and 20. Pretty straightforward there, nothing too crazy. As far as the transmission, of course, we left that standard. The power is restricted just a little bit on the ECU in particular to 99% to get us to, I seem to recall it was either the same or very close to GT2. I think it did have 247 in GT2. I'm forgetting the number at the moment, but you can check online. I'm pretty sure it was 247 though. If not, it was like 246 or something like that. And as far as the ballast, you want 70 kilos. Again, that brings us up to the Gran Turismo 2 weight. And I've put that 25% toward the rear, which gives us a pretty nice 51-49 split. As far as the downforce goes, I've got those obviously on nil because nil is what we're working with. It's got the front and rear fixed wings, but apparently they're not doing that much in the case of this game. And as far as over here, of course, you can see the other stuff, which we, of course, fitted. So pretty modest on points, certainly modest on power. You know, by today's standards, this is more like hot hatch kind of territory. But all that remains is to jump out to Tokyo, of course, on the streets to see what the car can do in practice. Now, this is another one of those cars which, I mean, it doesn't really need notes. It's a pleasure to work with. It's super forgiving. The R31 is already a great platform. It's one of my favourite Skylines. I love how different it feels being rear-wheel drive. Of course, it saves a huge amount of weight over the bigger, heavier Godzillas that came after, or Godzilla in particular, I guess the R32, I should say. And in terms of the handling profile, it doesn't drift so much as pivot. It kind of feels like the car steers from the middle in a weird kind of way, almost like I used to say about the Honda NSX Super GT cars in Gran Turismo 6, but not in a bad way. With those cars it was kind of weird, with this one it works to its favour. It's really nimble despite being kind of a long car in comparison to some of the Japanese motors. It's got a bit of a long, narrow thing going on, but it's really good through corners, a pleasure to work with, and again, on sports tyres for under 500 points, you could definitely use it in career mode or maybe even online if you wanted to. So it's a nice throwback to GT2, definitely one of those builds which is more so for the fun of it. Maybe if you see one come up in the used dealer, or you've got one that you won or whatever and just got it lying around, it's just something fun to do with it. And of course, as with a lot of the other brands that I've done multiple builds for, like Mines or Spoon, we're just building out the collection at this point of Tommy Kairas. So of course, stick around for the rest of the Special Projects Pack 15 builds in the rest of this week. Check out the ones which we've already done, and until next time, I'll see you then. But for now, thanks for watching.